A bit later on, we're going to be having a discussion about the Just Stop Oil campaign and their tactics to gluing themselves to the road, ambulances, fire engines not able to get through to emergencies. You talk very passionately about saving the planet. Do you support those tactics?
No, but there is a but in this, and that is the crisis that we're heading for, which may be irreversible. We don't want to think like that because we need to do everything in our power to prevent the crisis that's coming down the road. So is that tactic a reasonable tactic to try and wake the world up? Probably not, because it causes mayhem, causes chaos. I think it's too extreme. But by the same token, how do we get people to take note properly so that there's a right level of movement on the environment?
Yeah, I mean, we're just watching these pictures, the protesters clearly causing an obstruction, which means that emergency blue light vehicles... I mean, you know, John, you can imagine, can't you, if you're a parent in an ambulance like that with a child who needs to go to hospital.
Well, there's extremists in every section of society, isn't there? No matter what you do, there's always those extremists that believe so passionately in the cause and are prepared to use any methodology whatsoever to get the point across. And, of course, that's just ridiculous what they're doing. But we do need to do more. The politicians need to do more. The world needs to do more.
And what do you feel about the protests and the environmental protesters who presumably you share a lot of beliefs with? They are trying to do what's right for climate justice and the future of this country and increase renewables. Unfortunately, the result is blocking emergency vehicles. Do you support those protests?
No. I think that the aims are laudable. The tactics are utterly stupid and self-defeating. You know, for people like me and many people around the country who I think most people accept the case for climate safety and want to see us moving to renewable energy, which is cheaper and offers more security, more guarantees against people like Vladimir Putin. I think that this is just one surefire way of turning people off a very valid cause, and I think that they should really go back to the drawing board and think again.
OK, 27 minutes past 8, climate protesters have been criticised once again, and pretty fiercely, because their roadblock in central London has caused delays once again to emergency services.
The London Fire Brigade said that the demonstrators blocked their routes of one of their engines in Knightsbridge, and the protests have been going on now for nearly 2 weeks, and so far more than 300 arrests have been made.
So we are going to debate that in just a moment, but the Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, joins us this morning. What do you make of those protests, Jacob Rees-Mogg? They have a very important point to make about, frankly, the future of the planet. Are they making it in the right way?
Well, I'm a great believer in freedom of speech and in the right of people to protest. That is fundamental to how our democracy works. But there is a line that has to be drawn, and I think people gluing themselves to pavements or to police vehicles is not a legitimate form of protest. So it's all a question of balance.
They say, of course, that by doing this, by crossing the line, as many people, including you, think, they are actually getting the attention that the problem deserves. And if they didn't go this far, they wouldn't be getting as much publicity for their cause.
They may get publicity, but people think they're idiots, so it doesn't help their cause.
Well, not everybody thinks they're idiots, do they? I mean, some people do support them.
I'm afraid I think that extreme forms of protest undermine the campaign that they're seeking to promote. That dignified protest, the going on marches, using freedom of speech, dare I say standing for election? Why don't they do that? If they can win elections, they can change policy. That's the easiest way to change policy.
All right. Well, we'll ask one of their supporters, Peter Tatchell, that very question when we do this story in about 5 or 6 minutes from now. But let's come on to government policy now. It's very hard at the moment to get people like you to say what you think about things. Everyone's backed off since the mini-budget exploded in the government's face. We had the Deputy Prime Minister on yesterday, and we just couldn't get an answer to any questions we put to her about what she thinks about policy. You're on the record as saying that you'd be happy to have fracking in your back garden. You're on the record, this is very on the record, as I say. You also think that that benefits should be linked to inflation. Are you able to repeat those opinions here now?
That I would happily have fracking in my back garden in West Harptree. It might upset my neighbours, so I don't want to do that. But that if my neighbours would agree, I'd be more than happy to do it if the geology was suitable.
Let's go back to those Just Stop Oil protesters who the Business Secretary has just labelled idiots, blocking traffic, including emergency vehicles in central London.
Yes,
Human rights activist Peter Tatchell says their actions are justified, while broadcaster and commentator Lynn May says the protests are unjust. Peter Tatchell, the government has just said you're idiots.
Well, you know, disruptive protests have to have some compelling moral reason. No one wants to cause inconvenience to the public. But these protests are driven by the warnings from climate scientists. They warn, for example, there's a real danger that the Antarctic ice shelf will collapse, causing massive rises in sea levels. That would flood large parts of coastal Britain, including some of our coastal cities. It would mean that hundreds of thousands of people would lose their homes and their jobs and have to move to higher ground. Yet at the very same time as this research is coming forward, the government is pushing for a new oil and gas licenses offshore, a new coal mine in Cumbria, and a big push for fracking. All these things will exacerbate the climate crisis.
But
so the protesters are saying, we're trying to get the government to listen, but they're not listening. They're going against what the scientists say.
But so many people, including myself, would agree with almost everything you've just said. So many people are very, very worried about global warming and want us to get away from fossil fuels and onto renewables as fast as possible. That's a very widely held opinion. But they don't support the tactics, and that's what this interview's about. It's not about global warming, it's about the tactics that the protesters are using. And we had 2 years ago a terrible case when Insulate Britain protesters glued themselves to the M25 and stopped the traffic and, yes, raised the issue and raised the profile. And a woman who'd just suffered a stroke and was in a car with her son trying to drive her to hospital was trapped in the queue for hours. And the medical staff at the hospital said that when she got there, she was paralysed. And she remains paralysed, and she wouldn't have been paralysed if she got to the hospital on time. Those protesters were directly responsible for that woman's condition today. And that's what people are concerned about.
Well, I totally understand and agree. You know, in those circumstances and in any circumstances, emergency vehicles should be given access, but their access should not be impeded. That is the right thing to do. And I think in 99% of cases, the protesters have done that. They have allowed access and free movement of emergency vehicles.
Well,
the fire brigade in London have said that they haven't. The fire brigade in London have complained bitterly that their fire engines couldn't get through. So, respectfully, you're wrong on that.
Well, of course, some roads were blocked, but there were still alternative routes. I live in South London, and recently one of the bridges was blocked, but I went across via another bridge. Now, you know, it's not as if every road in London or anywhere else is being blocked.
No, but on a 999 call, you want to take the shortest possible route. You don't want to go around the houses.
Well, the detours are actually not very substantial. They're fairly short and not going to add much to the journey. But of course, as I said, we want to make sure that emergency vehicles can get through. And I know that most of the protests have done that.
I wouldn't want to be in one of those ambulances with a protester saying, just go round the long way to hospital. Lynn May, for somebody like you who thinks protesters have gone too far, what do you think the consequences should be?
Well, Peter, it's not about preventing the emergency services from getting through. It's about a real emergency. If we look at the word emergency, every moment is crucial for those ambulances and those fire brigades to get through. So you to even suggest, you know, go and find another route, I think that's quite hurtful to many people that really need to get to the hospital. And I think a lot of this language, language such as a climate emergency. Can you please explain to me what is meant by a climate emergency? Because, you know, Greta Thunberg, who seems to be a deity with a lot of the protesters, has written in her book that the world could possibly end in 10 to 12 years. So this has been debunked. Scientists have said this is absolutely not true. Going to your point of rising sea levels, Netherlands is under sea levels and they've managed to cope just fine. I'm not saying that we shouldn't consider that there is something that needs to be done. However, there's policy in place in terms of net zero being at 2050. That's when they're going to aim for that. And my thing is, what more do you want us to do right now?
Lynn, let's just let Peter have a quick response.
Well, of course, their commitment is to net zero, but the government is right now doing the exact opposite, is expanding fossil fuel production, which is fueling the climate crisis. And that is why the protesters feel so frustrated. They've seen the scientific evidence presented to the government. The government has ignored it. The lobbying has failed. Negotiations have got nowhere. This is a desperate measure motivated by high moral principles to save our society, to save humanity from climate destruction.
Well, you've both had your say, and thank you very much for saying it. Interesting debate. Thanks for your time, both of you.